You're listening to the Friends Talking Nerdy Podcast Network.
Friends Talking Nerdy. If your friends are nerdy and you are nerdy too, I want to talk to you. Friends Talking Nerdy.
We're warming up. My goodness. Like the other day, I was walking to work and it was negative 12 degrees, and now it's damn near in the 40s and going to be raining here in a couple of days. Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to another episode of Friends Talking Nerdy. This is Tim the Nerd coming at you in a very, very exhausted, tired state, like I probably normally do anyway, since I don't get the best of sleep. Sitting across from me, we have Your Holiness, the Reverend Tracy. How you doing?
I'm doing pretty well, you know, just kind of getting through these last little stages of, like, pregnancy, because I'm in my final trimester of the thing I like to brag about, my geriatric pregnancy. But now everything seems to be going well. Like, we were kind of rooting for him, because, you know, there's this whole thing where they have to turn in a certain direction. Like, there's a reason children are top-heavy. Mm-hmm. And the reason that it is applicable is right now, because you really want a baby to, like, be head first. Otherwise, it's, like, a whole complicated fucking thing. And so we were, you know, kind of getting the talks, like, well, you know, if he doesn't turn, we're going to have to talk about doing this other thing. But it does look like he's turning. Everything's going great there. So overall, I'm pretty excited. Before we go into my week, though, I wanted to ask how your week went, because, I have a story.
Yeah, you were making friends this week.
Yeah, I was making internet friends, because I'm super popular on the internet, guys.
Well, you know, we released another episode. By the time you hear this, episode 5 of Tim's Tremendous Tapes will have dropped, and I featured albums from people that were nominated for the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame this year, like George Michael, Cyndi Lauper, The Spinners, and other stuff like that, so that was fun. Even got to spend some time this week with the Mr. Reverend going grocery shopping, which was fun.
Yeah, I heard that was an adventure. I mean, not that it really was, just that you guys actually just went out and got some stuff done.
Yeah.
Because, I'm transitioning to my full-time job. Mm-hmm. So what was normally my duty of kind of going out and doing groceries, because I was part-time, this week I am fully in the office, and the Mr. Reverend is off in between. Now what we can talk openly about is he's starting a new job. So he took a week off and has been taking over the house spouse duties, and so he packed up Tim the Nerd, and they went on a little grocery shopping adventure.
Indeed. It was rather fun. Also, I had mentioned it on the show before that Professor Aubrey mentioned that the place where I last brought Phil had a copy of his paw prints, and those finally arrived.
Nice.
Yeah, so it was kind of one of those bittersweet things, kind of seeing that, you know, just obviously you of all people are very much aware of how that, you know, how that can, you know, affect you, because on the one hand, you know, you're like sad and like, I don't got my fur baby here anymore, but on the other hand, it was, you know, just kind of, it allowed me to go back and not only replay, you know, past events with him in my head, but, you know, go back and look at pictures, like that one awesome picture of me lying down and he's like on top of my head with like the happiest look on his face. You know, I mean, I think I told you about how he picked me, right? Mm-hmm. Yeah, just he wanted to look at the window, just tap my leg, looked at the window, looked back at me, and, you know, that was him. But, that kind of bittersweet.
Oh, I totally understand, because, of course, I'm a, you know, self-proclaimed photographer, and Google Photos does this really cool thing where it will make, you know, collage memories. It'll be like, you know, you and Baco, like, and it'll bring up me and, you know, my oldest stepkid, or you and Binkin, and it's me and my little dude, my stepson. And so, of course, I got hit with you and Beans. And it kind of took me a little bit to open it up, but what I loved was I was able to laugh because one of the photos you can very clearly read on my shirt that it just says, like, the whole shirt says, "I heart my cunt." And I'm very sorry if that offends anybody. That is what the shirt says. It is something you can buy if you attend something like the Vagina Monologues. So that's what that is from. But you can very clearly see my cat laying on my chest, and just all you can see is heart and C word. So I couldn't help, like, as much as, like, I knew it was going to be emotional to see stuff like that. I opened it, and I love that I'm able to just zero in and deflect with humor. And then the other thing is, you know, I've had my waves because grief comes and goes. It's very natural. It's how grief works. And so I have a long history of writing songs as they would be sung by my cat. And something that I actually told the Mr. Reverend recently is in part of trying to, like, cope with some of these feelings that keep coming back up. In Lion King the musical, there is a song called He Lives in You. Mm-hmm. And so I basically parodied that in the voice of Beans, which sounds a lot like this. I think I've done the Beans voice before on the show. I don't know, but if I haven't, I've done it now. The kids do this to say we're talking like Beans. Joa does this. The Mr. Reverend does this to say he's talking like Beans. So it's just her thing, and it's, before anybody makes fun of it, it's more of a play off of Homestar Runner. If you ever watched any homestarrunner.com, you know, www.homestar10.net. Like, that's pretty much where Beans sort of came from, and a past roommate of mine. Which I actually reached out to him to let him know that, you know, Beans had passed away, and I thanked him for giving the iconic Beans voice to Beans that has been used by myself, the Mr. Reverend, my stepkids, like... We still do it. Like, even talking now, when we talk about Beans, we still use that voice to deflect a little bit with humor.
Yeah, like, even with Phil, like, when I adopted him in Portland, they had actually shipped him from Mississippi, you know, all the way to Portland, Oregon, for whatever reason. So, like, him being a tuxedo cat and everything, all I could imagine him was talking about drinking a mint julep while on the plantation, you know, looking at everything, Dad. Looky here, you know.
Oh, exactly. Like, I think it's good to give a voice to your pets or your companion animals, whatever you want to call them. Beans definitely had a distinct voice. So, yeah, I mean, that all being said, I completely understand, like, getting something like that. Because I know I got mine very soon after, much sooner than I really thought.
A year and a half.
Yeah, not a year and a half. Like, it was, you know, she passed away on that Sunday. I forget. It was the 15th. That's all I remember. On that day, and then that Thursday, they called me saying, hey, come pick this shit up. They didn't really say it like that. They were a very delightful group, and they were very, you know, I got a card from them as well as Beans' vet because I had to cancel an appointment. So I do love the tenderness that got handled with. But yeah, it can be very... surprisingly gutting to get those things, and I imagine that doesn't get necessarily easier with time. I could see that kind of, you know, if it had taken a while to get Beans' stuff back, I think it still would have given me a day to kind of, like, cry again. Yeah,
I mean, because, you know, he was a cat, but he was a big, big part of my life for, you know, the short time that he was in it. And, you know, I mean, as you know, just because they're a cat doesn't mean they're not going to have that impact on you, you know, and just, you know, yeah, I mean, like, even thinking back to, like, my friend Stephanie, who had passed away to uterine cancer, like, the last thing she ever saw from me, and, you know, I know this because of Facebook Messenger, you can see when somebody sees your messages, doesn't mean they read them, and I know we had that confusion this week, but it was a video I sent her of, like, Phil, quote-unquote, kissing me, because he used to do, like, love nips.
Yes.
And whatnot, so,
Cats
you know.
do that.
Yeah. Anyway, how did you make some friends this week?
So on this episode of How the Reverend Pissed Off the Internet this week, so you guys, I think I've mentioned, you know, I do try to go and comment on things publicly, especially since starting, you know, the Reverend Tracy as an actual page on its own, so it's not as connected to my personal stuff, which is really just more my personal stuff. Like, I've even kind of shut down even more what's shared publicly on that page. It's becoming really more that space for my friends again. Friends and family type thing. But basically, I kind of wound up feeling like a lot, like, do you ever just kind of feel like there's a theme of shit that happens or gets brought to your attention? And I swear to God, like, this last week was just bullshit cyberbully behavior.
Oh, man.
And it was two different ways. So First, I'm not going to name the Discord channel, but there was one that I had tried to join, noticed some kind of bullshit bully behavior, right? And it actually went against the terms that you literally just had to agree to even make a comment or have a conversation.
Wow.
So they did that. I kind of pointed out that it was bullshit bully behavior and then left. Just whatever, this isn't for me. You guys say this is all about like community and, you know, the same little fluffy bullshit stuff that I think all of them say, to be fair, right? Mm-hmm. Come here and make friends. Okay, but then you say something incredibly unwelcoming that was actually kind of shitty. So I don't know. I have a very Theodore Roosevelt type mentality of being a good American boy. I don't like bullying. I don't like it when it happens to me. I don't like observing it either. Mm-hmm. So I think that turned out to be kind of a funny theme this week. I'm not necessarily the type of person to just drop it and not bring it up. Sometimes I will point things out and then move on with my life. And then continue to not give a shit what you think of me from that point forward. But I have still said something. If you want to reflect on it, cool. If you want to double down on any confirmation or anchor bias, awesome, which is exactly, I guess, what these guys did. I thought it was super funny because somebody, like, tried to reach out to me and tried to be like, I don't like it when people talk behind other people's backs. So let me contact you and tell you that these people are talking shit about you. And I'm like, okay, sure. I'll listen to this for a minute. And I'm not making fun of this person for doing that, by the way. I do understand that can be a very genuine urge for people. Mm-hmm. I had no intention of going back to this group, so I kind of already knew I didn't care. But I thought it was hilarious. As a Tim, did you realize that I am very anti-gun? So what I did kind of point out that was funny was that I guess because, you know, on my Discord, I've got co-host of the Friend Talking Nerdy podcast. And I guess they went on there, glammed onto this gun stuff. I guess they maybe listened to like 2 seconds of the episode. Enough to just do this kind of like, I hate this person. And then just glammed onto one thing that maybe I said and decided it meant I'm anti-gun, which I actually laughed about. Because if you actually listen to those episodes, I talk about how I own them. I enjoy shooting them. I don't really support bans. I support common sense gun reform, which a lot of people do.
Yeah.
So yeah. I kind of scratch my head. But anywho, so to my new adoring fans out there, if you're listening to this one too, thank you for the listens. It's great for our podcast. Even if you only listen to 2 seconds of it, it still kind of goes towards our listens. So it did kind of make me laugh that doing that led to listens. So in a weird way, it still served us.
But at least that's better than the guy that when we did the episode about banned books, started like ripping into us. And I forgot the specifics of what he wrote, but it was basically all of the arguments that we said were the reasons why you shouldn't ban books. So like he clearly didn't listen to the episode and was just hey, you're talking about banned books, you must be one of them progressives and all that stupid stuff,
Oh, yeah, that's basically this is a bunch of what I think he said, like, well, this is a very good demographic of like what you're going to find in this area, and we're all like libertarians and pro-gun. I'm like, okay, like I'm cool with that. Like I literally have no problem. I actually don't think that somebody's political stance is the only thing worth valuing them on. So normally I get along with a lot of people, but I thought it was super funny.
Yeah.
And then the other one was something that I even kind of shared, a little bit of sentiment on. That I think I'm officially over the people of Walmart mentality that is becoming kind of a common trend in Reels and stuff. There were a few that I saw this week where it's like, how is this not just cyberbullying? And I understand. If I'm out in public, I technically don't have rights that protect me from being recorded. Nobody does. Mm-hmm. But I had commented on this one thing that I had seen that, I basically just said, let's call this what it is. Can we grow up and stop recording people trying to either do a job or live life because we think it's funny? It could humiliate them, and we're doing it just so people think we're cool, aka we get likes and reactions on Facebook.
Yeah.
Because how is that not just the same level of bullying that many of us kind of maybe experienced like in school, but just put on a broader scale? And then I actually wound up having to turn off comments on that because a lot of people liked it. So I should preface, it was the loud few choosing to call me a Karen, which is the most hilarious thing. Because it's like, one of them, I actually think I said, all right, well, I'm not going to be offended by somebody misusing the term Karen. Okay, boomer.
Wow.
So it was just kind of an interesting week with that. I wound up peace outing on both of them. And, you know, unfortunately, I am thicker skinned than to care about the opinions of people who think it's funny to pick on strangers, right? Like, I think people of Walmart started, and I will admit that I used to think that stuff is funny. I have kind of since come to learn and understand that this is kind of a form of bullying people.
Well, it's like in comedy, they call it punching down instead of punching up.
Yeah.
I mean, the best comedians like your George Carlins, even though they had a lot of dark material, they were punching up, fighting against power, not goofing on, the people that really can't defend themselves. Like an Andrew Dice Clay, another comedian who, went after minorities, went after women. I found him funny, but even I have to admit he was punching down, doing easy stuff. And at the end of the day, that is bullying.
Yeah.
That's taking a power that you have in terms of making people laugh and using it to just hurt someone for no other reason than to hurt them.
Than to look cool.
Yeah.
Which, again, that was a lot of my experience anyway, and a lot of people's experiences. That's why bullies bullied, like, in grade school through high school, was because it got them attention, it made them look cool. Mm-hmm. Sometimes it was to instill fear because they liked that better. But a lot of times when bullies pick on and make fun of, it is to look cool. Mm-hmm. So, I don't know. And I do have to admit that I think a lot of my growth in that did come from doing, improv workshops and stand-up comedy and working on, like, critical comedy where you come together and you critique each other's bits. Mm-hmm. And a lot of that learning came from that. There was actually a lot of personal development I got in doing different forms of improv and stand-up comedy. Mm. And where you realize there's just certain things that actually aren't that funny. One of the videos I did see that I don't mind saying what it was there was a gentleman who was very obviously nodding off on a bus. And instead of anybody helping him, somebody filmed him, watched him fall and hit the floor. And he, got up. And these are the things where people assume, he's so tired, or he's so drunk. And it's like, you could have just recorded somebody's narcoleptic seizure. You have no idea what you're doing when you do these things. So, yeah. I don't know. I just had I was over it this week. So that was my fun little adventures in internet land and making friends.
Well, that's why I gave up on making friends a long time ago.
Yeah, apparently I'm no fun and I'm a Karen, guys. So, my bad, yo.
Well, that is the furthest thing from the truth, though. Let's be honest here.
That's not even the appropriate use of the term Karen.
Yeah. I mean, if you're going to make fun of somebody in filming them, I mean, I have no problem, of, like, if you're at a store and you see, like, a customer that's going nuts for no reason, take out your phone, record them, and embarrass the hell out of them for intimidating a store worker, doing whatever. But, to your point, yeah, if it's just some guy that's on the bus or train heading home from work and he's so tired that he falls out of his chair, like, I feel bad for that guy.
Oh, yeah. I mean, and it doesn't matter. It's like, to me, the more Karen attitude would have been what the video was, which was essentially filming somebody doing their job and happening to catch on video somebody somewhat harassing that person while they're doing their job. So I thought it was like an interesting projection. But basically, folks, if you're going to try to make me cry on the internet, at least use words correctly. Otherwise, I'm not going to take you seriously.
Well, you handled it as well as President Biden did the State of the Union. That was quite the experience. And wow, like, Republicans are have no shame.
No. He actually got very openly booed about some stuff that I'm like, but why?
Because they don't like hearing, the words that come out of their mouths. He called them out on it. And then the funny part is, he got them all to publicly, loudly say that they're not going to cut Social Security or Medicare or anything like that. So, yep. But like, man, just... Republicans should feel deep shame for how they disrespected the president in that weekend. And I'm not saying that they have to agree with him at all.
Oh, no. But the thing I wanted to point out was he actually made that designation that there's kind of a far-right group. On this show, we very often refer to them as Team Redders, right? Because it's the far. I don't like the fars on either side, to be totally honest. But those were... Again, it goes into the loud few, right? I don't think most of the people who booed, I don't think it was as many. Like the
Walmart Cruella DeVille, Marjorie Taylor Greene, like, man, she... Yeah, just, it's... I hope...
That's so mature, right? Anyway,
yeah.
Sorry.
I mean, my hope is that, what he did in his speech was very much intentional to rile up those people, to make them look bad on purpose, in terms, because, we have some important elections coming up. Look what's going to happen next year, another presidential election.
Oh, yeah. And it'll be interesting.
Yeah. But anyway... Let's not talk about that. This is the month of love.
Right. We don't want to focus too much on politics because we do try to be somewhat topical. Mm-hmm. It seems like we actually got a good amount of downloads from our last episodes. So we're definitely down to continue the theme of talking about kind of stuff revolving around Valentine's Day love and relationships.
Indeed. So let the folks at home know what we are talking about today.
So I know this seems kind of counterintuitive, given that this is going to come out kind of as we get closer to Valentine's Day. Mm-hmm. But something that I wanted to talk about was the idea of chosen solitude. It's something that can be quite healthy depending on your mental status around it. It's something that, also feels very unchosen by some people. So I thought it would be worth talking about, and I found a little ditty of a pro and con list for us. The pros and cons of keeping to yourself, aka solitude or chosen solitude. I think this is going to actually kind of talk about both, whether it's chosen or not. So I think, what was it? I don't remember who we said was going to lead with the pros or cons. Are you doing pros?
Yeah, that would be nice.
Okay, you're doing pros. We can't be double negative.
Yeah, yeah.
I mean, we can, but
Yeah, that would lead to an interesting episode, but...
We don't not double negatives.
Yeah, something like that. Yup. But, we'll dive into here with pro number 1. Being alone helps with productivity and creativity. Just as any creative thinker, the process of sitting down and coming up with ideas is most often successful when done on one's own. By disconnecting the outdoor voices, you allow yourself to become more in sync with your thoughts, which gives your brain a chance to wander while also getting the creative juices flowing. And definitely true. I mean... whether it's, the work we do on the show here or whether it's, times to where I'm writing. Yeah, I mean, if you're in a room with people and they're trying to talk to you, you're not going to have that time to sit down and do the work you need to focus on in terms of being creative. And I'm sure it probably is the same thing too with like handcrafts, if you're crocheting or something like that and you got somebody talking to you, like you couldn't do it, but sometimes you need that time to be able to focus on, a particular stitch or whatever.
Especially if it's something new, right? Mm-hmm. Productivity and creativity are definitely good reasons, right? Like I know friends who, when they're working on comedy bits, or had friends in the past where they might have a little bit more locked in time because they want to make sure they can focus on that. I have friends who have written books that, once again, they need their kind of alone solitude time to work on those things. Definitely nothing wrong with choosing solitude in those projects. Another thing that had come up, I believe in some of the articles we've shared back and forth as we were talking about broaching this subject, was that being alone can also help you with emotional regulation when you're using that alone time properly. So I know this isn't exactly covered in the rest of the pros and cons, so I kind of wanted to throw it in of like, yeah, there's like some good things that you can work on in general in chosen solitude time, whether it be a creative task or whether it be a self-improvement task. But at the same time, you have to choose to work on those things in that alone time.
And that, I think, is kind of key here to everything that we're going to be talking about, because, you know, it's like I mentioned last week, too, you know, like the realization that I had that, you know, after my divorce, I was continually looking for, you know, to have someone in my life because I didn't want to be alone, where, you know, sometimes you need that. You need to prepare yourself for that as an adult, because at the end of the day, you are not guaranteed the presence of somebody in your life. You're just not. Doesn't matter how much you want it. Doesn't matter how much of a nice person you are. There can be any number of reasons that life is going to put you in a spot to where you are alone. And the better you are at being able to handle that, the better you're going to be at being able to handle people when they finally do come into your life.
Yeah, and I think there's actually a pro later that's going to go into that a little bit more. So I will go into con number 1.
Yes.
Being alone can make you lethargic. You've heard the expression, don't let your mind go soft. Well, too much idleness can do just that. Not literally, of course, but it is vital that you periodically engage with a book or puzzle or any logic-based task to keep your brain functioning at peak performance. And I think this again goes into when you feel like you're forced into solitude. I think this is an easier slippery slope to go down.
Yeah.
Because you're not necessarily doing it because of something that you want to accomplish, like writing a book or a creative task. You're feeling like you're forced into it. Mm-hmm. And I think that's where a lot of people end up getting sucked into the constant watching of TV. Like they're looking to be entertained, but that's not necessarily the same as engaging your mind. And I think that's why there are numerous studies that show that when you do that, it's not necessarily the best thing for your brain. Like, it's good to pick up a skill. Downloading Duolingo to learn a language, picking up a guitar and fidgeting with that, picking up a new, like, skill or hobby and learning those things in that time, because that is definitely better than just sitting down doing nothing.
Even a video game. Now, video games have a slippery slope of badness that you know, that a person... You know, like there have been times like the game Civilization. I absolutely love that game, but that's a game that I can play for like 10, 11, 12 hours in a row, mm-hmm. you know, and not healthy, you know.
And I am I used to game too much. And I think that's why I personally don't advise gaming, but that's based on my experience. Mm-hmm. So that does come with a little bit of bias. When I moved from Arizona to Oregon, I gave away my Xbox because I realized how much that was taking over my life versus actually going out and doing things. Mm-hmm. So there is a little bit of a slippery slope with game playing. It does technically engage you more than watching something. So maybe pacing that out with something. Maybe if that's your reward, I don't know, do something productive that earns like some game time for yourself if you really enjoy gaming. But having something that I think like gives you a finished product plays with the brain in different ways, as far as pleasure center, as far as endorphin type rush type things, melatonin, things like that. That's very good to get. Mm-hmm. Those same things that those people get from the likes from the video that they share, except it's a little bit more long term. Yeah. When you build something or you make something that sticks around, I think that's why I really like doing crafting and even cooking. Right? Like, I used to hate cooking. I think I've talked about that before. But then I turned it into a craft. That's where it's like, I love taking pictures of it because I made a craft and I don't have to worry about where to store it, who to give it to. I'm just going to eat it. But I still feel very accomplished for doing that. So some of the reframing of even mundane tasks, I think, can help you be less lethargic.
Yeah, and I mean, like I mentioned too, you know, one of the big reasons I started Tim's Tremendous Tapes, the podcast, was I found myself becoming more lethargic in terms of, you know, I would do my work, I would come home and just not feel the desire to do anything. Just, right. You know, depression will do that. So having something that will, you know, work the brain, you know, it doesn't have to be super intense at all, but something that will get you out of that mode of TV on, Tim, quiet, you know, is going to be good for your overall health.
Right.
All right. Pro number 2, being alone helps our brains recharge. Socializing will always be beneficial for proper brain function, but occasionally shutting your brain off is a boon too. It's all about balance. An empty house free of distractions allows you to clear your mind and begin thinking more clearly. Just don't forget to eat well and get plenty of sleep throughout. As someone who deals with anxiety, this is very much vitally important. Now, I know myself, I probably need to recharge more than probably the average, more socialized person out there, just because the slightest bit of socialization these days can really wear me out. And having that time to be alone is a great way to kind of get back into some form of normalness. So it definitely important to recharge. Now, having said that, I think if you are a person in my spot to where you do find yourself having to recharge a little more than other people, it is important to challenge yourself too, and not constantly have the recharge period be like a pacifier or something that will just keep you in that mindset. It's like appreciate it for what it is, but also kind of work towards not needing it as well. See if there are other ways that you can recharge apart from being alone.
Yeah, that even kind of goes into, there's something I think I shared just this past week. Psychology Today has just been super on with some really great articles lately. And it was a study they had done working with some people on challenging social anxiety. Mm-hmm. And something they had found was, they challenged them, and I forget how often it was. I'm sure we can go back and find it on Facebook, because I think I shared it in the group as well. I definitely shared it on the Reverend Tracy page, if you follow that page. But basically, yeah. Well, just because that's where I'm trying to share that stuff now, so I could say, hey, it's also here, because I don't always do as much stuff on there as like what can happen in our group. And if you're not a member of our group, you're not going to see that. But if you do have the ability to follow a page, I know for a fact I shared it there. And it was interesting because all they did was challenge people, not even a lot of time per week, but just spending something where you're pushing a little bit past your comfort zone. Mm-hmm. And what they found that worked for most people was doing something more like giving back, like donating time at shelters, like food drives, stuff like that. Some people even counted donating like hair clippings, it sounded like was one of them.
Yeah, I don't have to worry about that.
So, picking something kind of altruistic, like really seemed to have an extra benefit. Like it really kind of stuck with people, and it helped them kind of break some of the cycle of social anxiety. Because needing some time to recharge, perfectly fine. Mm-hmm. Needing too much time to recharge can be more of a symptom that might be worth addressing, I guess, is like something that's worthy of pointing out with this.
That is definitely a sign of a problem. And again, I'll be the first to admit that I have that problem. So that's something I do my best to be mindful of. Doesn't mean I am always successful, as you know.
Well, I like to relate these things to physical ailments because I do think our culture takes them more seriously. Mm-hmm. If you need a lot of food, that can sometimes be a symptom of something else going on.
You got a tapeworm,
too. Well, either a tapeworm or you've got some other metabolic issue or possibly like a thyroid issue. There's things that are worth addressing rather than just saying, no, I need this, mm-hmm. right? Like, and I promise I'm not trying to make fun of anybody who's large at all. Just medically speaking, there are a lot of things that can cause a more need for something on a physical level, right? Yeah. There's other things as well. Even needing more insulin is a sign of diabetes, right? Like that's a thing. And there are different ways you can manage that. Some of that is taking insulin. Some of that can also be dietary. Mm-hmm. So there's different ways to kind of address it when it is too much.
Indeed.
So going into con number 2, too much time alone is not good for your mental health. So see, here's this balance, right? Because recharging our brain is good. There's a significant difference between spending time alone and being lonely. And obviously, too much of the former can begin to look a lot like the latter. It is important to distinguish between the amount of time you spend alone and how you feel about the time you spend alone. Feeling lonely can bring with it not just emotional pain, but physical pain. So be sure to engage with friends and loved ones via televisual platforms or text messaging. And that's something that I can definitely speak to. Especially, like, I think a lot of us can because of the pandemic, right? Like, even if we were really good about going out and being around people and finding excuses to be around people, we really felt that, like, as a culture. I know that really opened me up more to using video chat. Like, I didn't really kind of give a shit about video chat before the pandemic. And then it kind of became more relevant in my life because I needed people interaction.
Yeah, and the podcast.
The podcast also helped, but that was, again, we were video chatting. Mm-hmm. I could see you. That helped. Another thing was with my mother-in-law, which, you know, she kind of struggled with that at first because, you know, not everybody really likes how they look on camera. And I was able to kind of tell her, I was like, yeah, but I get to see you. Like... You know, and for some reason that did actually reframe some things with her. And it kind of turned into this thing where there's kind of, there's more understanding with it. So there's different ways, even if you're not going out. But now, since we're on the other side of the pandemic, there are kind of cool ways you can get out and interact with people, like the game night that we wound up at.
Yeah, that reminds me of episode 28 of Friends Talking Nerdy, going all the way back into the archives, where I interviewed Dee Severe, the BDSM porn director, and we did it via Skype, but she was insistent that she was not gonna. Her words, doll herself up to be to have it be on video. I mean, we tried briefly to have a video version of the show, and at some point in the future we may try it again. But at that particular time for episode 28, we were not ready for that. So if she did put herself on video, it would not have gone anywhere. But it just reminded me of her saying, I don't want to doll myself up right now. It's like you do needle play and butt stuff, and you're worried about that. Come
on. Needle play and butt stuff, guys. This is the kind of quality content. No, I'm just... So we've got pro number 3.
Number 3. Being alone can be healthy for relationships. Believe it or not, time away from our partners can be a good thing. By separating, you allow yourself to revisit a sense of independence you may not have experienced in years, while simultaneously instilling a greater feeling of appreciation for our significant other. It's good to miss people, especially if a physical reunion is just around the corner. And vitally important in a relationship, it is. And, there have been times to where I think I've broken this, not intentionally, but, it's like, especially when you meet someone, you do have that feeling of, oh my God, they're the most super awesome person in the world, and I want to spend every single moment with them. And then by doing that, you're like burning the candle at both ends.
Right.
I mean, are there some people that can do that and survive and have a nice, healthy relationship? Sure. I've just not been able to do it,
Right.
I mean, you need to be able, and I like being introduced to polyamory too, taught me the importance of being able to work with a schedule and, schedule those times for yourself, because you will need that. And vitally so, as the pro says here too. Yeah. I mean, if you are doing stuff on your own and you have a significant other, by the time you're done with whatever activity you're doing alone, you're going to be like, yeah, I get to be with a significant other instead of being with them all the time, because that can and will get old no matter how much you love a person.
Right. And that even like, some of the stuff you were talking about, and I know we wanted to talk about this, so we might end up by the end of this month, of the concept of NRE, which is new relationship energy, really hot poly term people talk about a lot. And so what can stink is when you're not kind of aware of chemically what your brain does in the beginning of a relationship. And if somebody is ready to move into having alone time, whereas the other person is not, the person who is not ready can take that as a loss of interest. And that's not always the case. It's actually very natural to eventually be fine with not staying up until 2 o'clock in the morning talking. Like, there are things that go on in your brain that there's a reason you can suddenly do that and not feel as tired the next day. But there's also points where that's going to naturally taper off, right?
Yeah.
And so the other part to this is this talks about, obviously, while still being with a partner, being alone can also be healthy for your next relationship. Like, I still think the number one piece of advice I give people who feel like they are in unchosen solitude when it comes to relationships is take that time to invest in yourself. Get into your hobbies. Like, instead of, hopping on the dating websites, which we just talked about the pros and cons of the apps in the last episode, is the whole why not both mentality. Well, where else can you meet people? Well, you can find meetup groups, either through like Discord or even Facebook local groups, and you can find that based on interests that you actually like, and go there and meet people who are already in this interest with you. Whereas sometimes when the focus is on getting into the next relationship is where you can accidentally do that false front. Again, this is something very naturally our brain wants to do because that's the focus. Right? I want to be with somebody, so I'm going to find somebody to be with, and I'm going to be everything that I think that they want me to be. And then when that isn't something that you can actually sustain long term, that's where some of those relationships crash and burn really fucking hard.
Yeah.
Right? Like, and it's that pleasure trap temptation, because you have all of that NRE helping stoke that fire to make you put up that you are interested in this thing that you're really not that interested in. And so when that NRE starts to taper back, that's where it just really gets harder to keep that face up. And that's where it's like, well, you lied to me about who you were. Well, you didn't mean to lie. It was a very natural urge to think that you could get into those things because your goal was being with a person instead of maybe your goal being investing into a thing and finding people who are into that thing. I think that makes sense. Like,
yeah,
you're going for the finding people who are interested in what you're interested in instead of just finding a human and trying to find interest with that human.
And I think, too, I mean, with NRE being what it is and being alone, if you are properly scheduling your time with someone and not, falling into the trap of, talking until 4 o'clock in the morning and then seeing them again at 7 o'clock in the morning and going from there can help the NRE last longer.
Right.
Because you're properly, you're one, focusing on yourself by being alone, but, that's also kind of stirring up those feelings of, hey, I miss this person who's giving me all those happy chemical type feelings in my head, right? And then by the time you do reunite, it's going to be happier and hopefully last a lot longer, but...
Exactly. And then the other thing that I think it can be good for your next relationship is when you think about it, somebody being super codependent is not actually a very sexy trait, right? Like somebody, I need somebody. Like we even kind of make fun of that type of person in real life. Love me, please. So, I mean, trying to find ways to not invest in being that kind of person, being independent, being able to take care of your own stuff, whether that be, the self-care element, the cooking for yourself, the cleaning up after yourself, like those tend to be the traits that are more attractive to somebody looking for a long-term partner, right? Like, right. I don't think I'm sniffing glue on that one. Like, typically, people aren't looking for somebody who's codependent. They tend to like independence. So if you're not in a place where you're in a relationship but you want to be in, honestly, some of the better things you can do for yourself is work on yourself, which we'll probably get to that just after this last con.
Indeed. What is that last con?
So the last con is being alone can lead to depression. There is a long-standing link between loneliness and depression. Some studies have even shown structural differences between a, quote, normal brain, I like that they at least threw that in quotes, and one starved for companionship. Too much isolation causes fluctuations in thinking, causing sufferers to perceive the world around them in a negative light. Telehealth centers and hotlines can help those who may be experiencing stronger than normal feelings of depression. It has like a little summary paragraph that I'm not going to worry about because it's not really about this con particularly. And I think this goes into some of the stuff that Tim, you and I had kind of shared back and forth. It seems to be that, yes, it can lead to depression, but that also very much has to do with your state of mind around being alone.
Yeah. And
also, I want to point out, companionship does not just exist in romantic relationships. Being lonely is like you're actually not choosing to even hang out with friends because that counts as companionship. And so if you give yourself those nibbles of companionship by actually hanging out with real humans, it can help avoid some of that depression that can happen with being single, unchosen solitude, however you want to put that one. And
I did like the fact that they talked about, it can cause people to perceive the world in a more negative light. I mean, to your point, yes, lately, for me, I have been more focused on solitude. For everything I've been through the past couple of years, for me right now, it feels right. Having said that, I also realize, knowing, my path with depression throughout the years, that, being completely isolated and alone from people would also be a huge fucking mistake on my part, so it's all about challenging yourself, like to your point, going out of your comfort zone as much as you can. I mean, I make it a point to, whether it be through chat or, like Facebook Messenger or, video chats or something like that, chat with friends, throughout the country, throughout the week, chat with my kids, and just keep that link to people out there, like I'm at a point where, like right now, I don't know if I necessarily want to meet new people, but I definitely want to, keep cultivating the relationships I have with the people I already know until I am ready to open, that gate again into my weird little world to people.
And at least you have the awareness of that, though, because I think sometimes people fall into the trap of, well, this feels right for me. So again, trying to make it as a correlation to something physical, it might feel right to walk with a strange cadence and a limp. That doesn't mean maybe don't get it checked out to make sure if it's healthy and right.
Right.
Correct? Like, because unfortunately our brain is not necessarily the best gauge of when we need help navigating or curing something. Right. So having that little bit of that self-reflection time and a realization that just because it feels right doesn't mean that you might not need help moving towards something different that could be more healthy for you. I don't think there's any problem with, working on those things, right?
And speaking of that, I think that is a great segue here into a list of 7 unsexy habits that can demolish your likability. So did we want to go through those?
Yes, and just to point out once again, these are habits that will diminish your likability in general, not just for romantic partners, but also platonic friendships. So if you are somebody who is struggling with platonic friendships as well, instead of maybe doubling down and being mad at the world, you can take those moments to be self-reflective and ask yourself, am I pushing away people? As somebody who was horrifically lonely for a long time because I push away people, I promise I say that with the most compassion that I can. But these are things to maybe consider if you feel like you're kind of in this cycle or in this funk, and you could use like trying to find ways to groom friendships and relationships.
Indeed. So what's number 1?
Number 1, breaking micro-promises. In day-to-day life, we make a lot of micro-promises to each other. I'll return your car by 7 p.m. I'll meet you at the coffee house at noon. And people often break them thinking it's harmless. They'll return stuff later than promised. They're unpunctual. But it's anything but harmless. These broken micro-promises do build up, and cumulatively, people respect you less because you don't keep your word, and they grow a subconscious grudge against you because breaking promises feels deceitful to them. A simple rule to follow is, don't make promises you can't keep. And for some reason, if you're unable to keep the promise you made, inform and apologize. Just a little side note, I absolutely love that my bonus kiddos have referred to the Mr. Reverend and I both as promise keepers. We do genuinely really try. If something does come up, and this is a great tip if you've got kids to help build some of that likability, which is important for bonding too there, is, you own it. Own it when you fuck up. Own it when something comes up, right? Like there's 2 reasons that a promise gets broken. Either you fucked up and overpromised, or life happened and you couldn't control it. That doesn't mean you don't address it. Neither one of those mean you don't address it.
Yeah, because most people are going to be understanding, especially if they're a friend. They're not going to want to assume that another friend of theirs who broke a micro-promise, like, hey, I'll return a car by 7, but then they return it the next day. Not addressing that could lead to somewhere down the road, the friend thinking, maybe I don't want to trust this person.
Right. Like more often than not, you should be keeping your word and setting up goals for yourself with that human that you keep. That way they know, oh shit, the Reverend Tracy is like an hour late returning this book they said they'd get back to me. I want that to be the exception when somebody thinks of me, not the rule.
I think too, another thing to keep in mind with this is don't beat yourself up over it, but don't let it, but don't become so lackadaisical as in terms of thinking, well, I'm human, it happens.
Yeah.
You know, it's like you do have control. Even if you broke a promise due to something completely out of your control, like, you know, let's take an imaginary scenario of having to return a book, but you have to rely upon public transportation to do so, and then there was something that kept you from being late or whatever, you know, that was something out of your control, but you still broke that promise.
Using kind of the case with the kiddos. Our flight got canceled. Kind of not in our control for Christmas break, but we communicated openly with them and stuff like that. And by the way, what's kind of nice about this one is you can even take this as a flip side to ask yourself if you are friends with the appropriate people. Because if you have kind of done your best to make sure this is an exception, not a rule, and you go to explain to somebody, hey, I missed this promise because da-da-da, and their reaction is to lay into you and make you feel really guilty, that might not be the type of person you want to be putting that energy into for a friendship. It sounds like maybe they could use some solitude time and address some of these behaviors themselves.
Yes, that means listening to our show here. But yeah, shall I dive into number 2?
Yes, get it.
All right, not being able to take a joke. Post my breakup, 2 of my friends often joked about how I'm not getting any action, and I joked back, yeah, I think my virginity is growing back. And we all had a good laugh. Of course, I was able to take the joke because I knew that these people cared for me and they joked because that's our thing. On the other hand, people are often not able to take a joke at their expense. They have thin skin and they get offended easily whenever someone makes even mild fun of them. This makes such people less likable, as it shows that they're less secure with themselves. The solution is to develop a thicker skin and learn to steer into the skid. When someone makes fun of you, learn to join them and laugh at yourself. This shows people you're secure and makes you more likable. Now, I would put an asterisk on that because...
Me too, but you go first.
Yeah, because I, you know, for like your situation with the friends, quote unquote, that you made on the internet this week, you know, if we're talking about a complete stranger not being able to take a joke, you know, over a comment you made on social media, that is one thing altogether.
Right.
But if you are making a joke at me and you make fun of my hair and then I get all hell-bent about it and upset about that, I'm the asshole.
Right, like, I'd like to think you know I care about you, and that I wouldn't be making a joke to try to make you feel shitty, right? I also give you that same respect. So I think that's why this is like an unlikable trait, is because when you get really offended at a good friend making a playful joke with you, and you kind of choose that, like, I get reaction and response can be different, especially if you're in a sore mood, but if you still choose to kind of respond ultimately by being very offended by this friend, by me, we'll just pretend it's me in this little scenario here, like, that's going to make me feel like you honestly don't think that I care about you, right? So it kind of oddly breaches trust in a different direction than I think people would expect it to.
Yeah.
Yes, our asterisks are exactly the same, though. This is talking about friends, people that have established that they give a shit about you. Maybe give them the benefit of the doubt that they're trying to possibly, like me, I'm a big deflector with humor. And that is something that I do try to keep under wraps because I do realize that that's not everybody's thing, right? So, I mean, yeah, hurtful jokes are one thing. This one, the virginity growing back, very clearly trying to deflect something with humor that's unpleasant.
Yeah.
Like, they're not, like, insulting them with the joke. They're making a joke that your virginity can come back after a certain amount of time, which is ridiculous. So, yeah, it goes back to assume the friends in your life care about you, unless they've shown kind of that pattern that they don't. And I think that goes back to kind of talking about the being an asshole when you miss a promise, right? Like, I think there would be other indicators that person maybe isn't that great of a friend match for you, and also if they are making actual hurtful jokes that cross a line, right? Like, physically insulting, I would say, is pretty much not going to be so much, you know, acceptable. Haircuts, a little bit to the side, right?
Yeah.
But like, as far as like cutting down somebody, cutting down their personality, cutting down their looks, cutting down their weight, I think those are crossing a line even if you are really good friends. But I think for the most part, being able to take jokes and understand that maybe you can try to like process this of, are they actually attacking me with this, or are they just trying to deflect this with humor? And then pepper in that little benefit of the doubt that they're a friend and they care about you. And try to use that when you're unpacking a joke that somebody has made. Indeed. Not by strangers. Fuck you. You don't have the right to make fun of people. You got to earn that.
But we still love that you listen. Thank you all for listening.
Yes.
All right, what's the next one?
So, extravagant fault finding. We've all met that person, the one who claims that everyone's stupid. They're like Sherlock when it comes to finding people's flaws. And often these people criticize others for having a flaw that they possess as well. It's ironic. That's actually called projection. I think it happens because of our egos. When we criticize others on something, we subconsciously tell ourselves, I'm better than him in this area. I do not have this flaw, even if that's false. That's why insecure people criticize everyone over everything. They think everyone else is flawed. The truth is, we all have a tendency to find flaws in others. I've learned a good way to counter this. First, I try not to point out other people's flaws. Let's be honest, we all end up finding flaws no matter how hard we try not to. So whenever I do point out someone's flaw, I try to follow it up with a statement, but that's okay. We're all very young right now. I shouldn't expect people to be perfect. This reinforces in my mind that everyone has flaws, and they don't need to be pointed out over and over again. This has rewired my mind to be less judgmental, and I point out other people's flaws less than ever. I think for me, like a really good personal example is interrupting. I think if we're all very honest with each other, we interrupt people all the time. That's actually kind of part of a flaw in human communications style. So it's interesting when I find it interesting when people get really mad when they're interrupted. Now, granted, I also sometimes feel myself get mad when I'm interrupted. However, I think because of how I've learned to think about interrupting, I tend to cool down a lot faster and remind myself, Reverend, you do this too. Like, everybody does it. Like, the thing is we have a thought, we get excited about it, it blurts out, right? And it can be as innocent as that. I think some of this, especially with interrupting, comes to understanding your relationship with that person.
Yeah.
If that person actually likes you and respects you, they're obviously not trying to interrupt you to steamroll your thoughts. It's just they're trying to have a conversation with you and something happened to be exciting in their brain. Now, that also comes with that gauge and that grain of salt if they're doing it all the time, if they're interrupting to be degrading, etc. That's kind of different. But just an example, I think interrupting is a bad habit a lot of people have. So there's other things, obviously, in fault finding, but that's a big one.
Well, also, I mean, interrupting, it depends on what we're talking about, too, because, you know, through normal speech, you're going to have that time when you interrupt. Now, you know, when we record on the podcast, I think we talk a little slightly differently than we do, you know, without the microphones going, because, you know, when without the microphone going, you know, there are times where we're interrupting each other left and right, whereas when we record, we both try and, you know, hold that thought and give the cues that we want to say something from there. Mm-hmm. But, you know, I've gone down this route before too, you know, in terms of being that person of finding fault in everybody else when, you know, I certainly have plenty of faults myself. And I think ultimately what calmed me down from doing that is kind of putting myself into other people's shoes. You know, mm-hmm. It's like, would I want a complete stranger or someone that I knew even to be that judgmental against me as a human being? No, I would not.
Yeah, I try to extend that benefit of the doubt.
Yeah.
You know, instead of projecting my possible flaws, I try very hard to extend the benefit of the doubt that I would want to be given to me. And it sounds like that's more or less what you're saying, too. Yes, and I think that's kind of a healthier thing to give people. It goes to the fact that there are more kind and nice and empathetic people out there than there are assholes. The assholes are just louder.
That reminds me, it was something that I encountered at when I worked at Apple. You know, there was a situation where there was an employee that was talking to a customer, but they were up in the customer's face. and talking, and somebody was going to go to that employee and talk to them about it, but instead of, starting in with, I don't think it was appropriate for you to be that close to that person, they asked, tell me about that customer. And then they found out that that customer in question had hearing problems. So the employee had to be real close to talk, to be able to be understood by that customer. And, taking that extra minute to not, rip into someone for, the fault that was perceived there was kind of eye-opening.
Right.
And I think more people need to take that time to find why, because again, we all have our problems, we all have our faults, it's just take that time to find out why.
Right.
All right. Number 4, overstepping your power. We're all part of hierarchies. For instance, I'm an intern at a hospital. So I work under junior residents, senior residents, assistant professors, associate professors, and HOD. So all of these are in a position of power over me. And they can exercise that power to some degree. They can ask me to do work in the hospital. However, at times they ask me to complete their personal chores. And if they asked it as a favor once in a while, that'd be okay. But they overstep their power by asking me to do stuff that isn't part of my job description, and they do it often, knowing full well that it's difficult for me to say no. It's not nice. I don't like it when it happens. I don't like them when it happens. If you're in a position of power over someone, don't overstep it. People will hate you for it. I don't know how much more that can be said about that. It's... One thing I hate in other human beings is when someone does have power of some sort, whether that be with money, their position, or whatever, and they end up abusing it. Mm-hmm. That to me, there's nothing more loathsome in a human being than someone who abuses their power.
Yep, just watch any of the documentaries on cults.
Yeah.
It'll make you angry. But yeah, I kind of agree with you. I think that one kind of, it's well summed up. I don't think it needs a lot of extra information on that one.
Indeed.
So I'll go ahead and do number 5, which I love. I got this one because I used to be so fucking guilty of this one. Giving advice that wasn't asked for. Giving advice is tricky. If someone asks for it, then you're good to go. However, when unasked, more often than not, advice is not taken in good faith for 2 reasons. It's taken as criticism, even though if your intent was to help. Any advice is a proxy statement for I know better, and the person you're giving advice to doesn't want to acknowledge or accept that you know better. That's why my rule is to not give advice unless the person asks for it. Only very rarely, when I know that the person will take my advice in good faith, I do not give unasked advice. And this is something that I know my intention is never to talk down to somebody with advice. However, I have also learned through life that I can't control how people take my intention, right? I think we've talked about it on listening to Hidden Brain when we went through that for a little stint, of we're actually really bad at gauging other people's intentions. So what I have learned to do is if I have that urge to give advice, I'll ask if they'd like advice. But the thing is I need to be okay with being told no too. Yeah. Because the fact of the matter is sometimes people are just wanting to vent and they're not in a fixed mode. Fixed mode requires being in logic brain. I know I've talked about that before on the show. There's many articles through Psychology Today or other vetted resources that will talk about this too. Somebody in logic brain and somebody in emotional brain are kind of speaking 2 different languages. So if that person is venting in an emotional brain and not looking to transition to logic brain problem solving, they're not going to give a flying fuck about your advice. So that's where it gets more offensive to that mindset when you just pile it on them. They're not there. They wanted somebody to hug them, to possibly, be empathic to them even, and just to be an ear. They weren't looking for problem solving because their brain is literally not on that language right now.
And a lot of the times, too, people that give advice constantly are a lot of times giving advice on issues, quote unquote, that don't have one definitive answer. at work, there's a guy who loves giving me advice about things that I'm doing, but, it's nothing. The advice he's given me is nothing that, if I did it my way or did it his way, they're both right, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
Like there was one thing, he told me, if you put the pallets here and this way, it's like, great, that works for you, doesn't work for me that way. And when you have that person that constantly wants to give you the advice, on the one hand, you want to assume positive intent, and you do have to think maybe they're doing this because they do want to be nice. But on the other hand, when they're constantly giving you advice after advice after advice, it's like, fuck you.
Exactly.
Even when it comes to a friend, if you have a friend that is constantly giving you advice, I mean, that can definitely be something that somewhere down the line could harm the friendship, because if the person is constantly, telling you, what you're doing is wrong, if you only did it better, why would you want to be friends with someone who thinks you're that bad of a person?
Right. And I also think there's a big difference between somebody saying, this is how I do it, and this is how you should do it, right? This is how I do it doesn't actually imply that it's better or worse. It just gives kind of an option that person can try. But I would still say, if you have the urge to share stuff like that, ask them if they're down to hear it. Because I think that even goes to consent in a way, to where at least you're giving them the opportunity to say yes and no. And even if they're people pleasing you by saying yes, they're more likely to take it better than you just unloading unwanted, unsolicited advice onto them.
Yeah, I mean, for the most part, I try not to give advice. I mean, does that mean I never do it? Of course not. On occasion I will, but I would much rather assume that the people in my life don't need me to say something unless it's so blaring obvious, because, I mean, you're human. For me to give you advice on something, I mean, I'm sure you would probably take it just fine. But, again, you have the capability of getting that answer yourself as well. So why would I do that?
Shared experience. That's what I mostly go with. And I think, where I am kind of opposite to that, I love giving advice, but not because I feel like I actually know the answer. It is because there weren't things that were inherently obvious to me, especially when it comes to, mental health, mental hygiene, learning how to manage, because I've talked about it before. I have definite diagnosed PTSD. I still believe that it more falls along the lines of CPTSD the more I had read into that. And I like to share. There are ways to move past that. There are ways to live life after traumatic events, right? There are ways you could do self-work that doesn't necessarily rely on being able to afford a therapist. So, right, but that's my intention. That is a place of excitement that I was like, oh man, dude, you don't have to live like this, right? So, comes from a very genuine space. But if somebody's going to take that as me saying, well, my way is better than yours, of course it's not going to land well no matter how I intend it.
Right.
So go ahead. Go on to number 6. Talk about how we shouldn't whip it out.
Whipping it out. Excuse me while I whip this up. No.
Never appropriate, but, we're misleading you. Go ahead.
Yeah, thank you, Mel Brooks. Number 6. That reminds me, on Hulu,
Yep.
they're coming out with a sequel to the History of the World.
Yep. They're finally doing History of the World Part 2. I want them to do Hitler on Ice so fucking bad it hurts me. And they've got a really great cast. I love Jack Black, and I know for a fact he's doing some bit with Stalin.
Nick Kroll is in it?
Nick Kroll, our favorite Fred Armisen, but anyway. But yeah, History of the World is coming out, so super glad about that.
So whipping out your phone all the time. When they're out meeting a friend or a few friends, people often whip out their phones. They don't realize that this is truly annoying to the person in front of them.
You're so mature.
Yeah, I can't help it. I'm 12 mentally. Anyway, we know. I mean, yeah, I'm wearing a Spider-Man jacket, by the way. So when you whip out your phone for any other reason except for a genuine need to, you subconsciously convey, my phone is more interesting than you, and that stings. Yeah. Hence, don't keep your phone on the table, neither face up nor face down. Keep it in your pocket. Give due attention to the person in front of you. Good advice. I think with the prevalence of this technology that we have today, I think a lot of people do, rely upon them probably a lot more than they should. So I think that there is some usage of it that I think people in society, in America at least, society-wise, will come to accept and tolerate. But yeah, I mean, how can... if we're having a conversation, but I'm spending all of my time just looking at my phone. Yeah. I mean, you're not going to think rude. I'm paying attention, do you?
It is rude. I mean, it's rude behavior. It's something that I will catch myself doing, and then I get mad at myself. Because here's the thing. The phone is actually inherently a bit addictive. Like, this is not news anymore. We know between how our brain interacts with blue light, so if you don't have any of those filter features on, you are more likely to just have this compulsion to check your phone. And it's like, I very honestly considered taking Facebook off of my phone because it's one of those things I just compulsively check. I will literally check it, put it down, and then check it in 2 minutes as if I am that fucking popular. And I'm not talking about checking my pages. I keep that separately, and I kind of do that under specific times. I'm talking about my personal Facebook that I have no real reason to think anybody is going to, interact with it every 5 minutes. You know what I mean? So, yeah, it is an addictive thing. So there are multiple good reasons for keeping it down. However, I do want to point out the privilege of people who have pockets that are actually big enough to put a fucking phone in. So if you don't have a pocket that's big enough, that's where I'm like, no, just put it face down and don't have it on vibrate. That's kind of good enough. I thought it was funny because I had seen somebody share, it's like, they're shady when they always put their phone face down. And I'm like, I do that so I don't see the notifications pop up. Mm-hmm. So I'm not tempted by it. Because if I'm engaged in a conversation, I don't need to see out of the corner of my eye that something flashed up on the screen because it demands your attention. It doesn't care what you want to do aside from interacting with it, so it's always going to try to find ways to get you to interact with it. That's literally what it's built for now.
And if you were having a deep conversation with a friend and you interrupt that conversation to look at a notification about your Angry Birds game, is that really being respectful to your friend?
Yeah. You can also turn a lot of that stuff off, which I highly recommend. A lot of us don't look at those settings. I've even done it for Duolingo because I don't give a shit about the leaderboard. I don't care that I'm not in first place anymore for the bronze, whatever. I just want to know, hey, am I going to lose my streak because I try to do it twice a day?
And the thing, as a former computer repair person that worked with portable devices like phones or iPads or something like that, having a bunch of notifications on will actually drain your battery faster. So it is vitally important for the long-term health of your phone to only have notifications on for the things that you absolutely need.
Yep. It also can increase anxiety because it's something that can, if you do struggle with anxiety and are looking for ways to manage that, I highly recommend taking time when you get notifications. Normally, I know on Android, if you swipe it down and you long press, you can actually turn off that notification from that screen without going into the individual settings. So you can let them come to you and turn them off. Mm-hmm. I didn't realize how much shit I was just allowing to go to my watch until somewhat recently. I don't know, I just got really aware of it and was like, I should block that app. I don't need that on my watch. I can check that on my notifications when I feel like looking at my phone next. Mm-hmm. And that's honestly helped a lot because now that I'm moving back into being a full-time worker, I need to prioritize things better. Yeah. Because I'm no longer part-time or I've got kind of a little bit of extra time to, catch up on stuff. I need to do things with more intention. And so coming to that realization, it's actually made me get even more good habits installed or uninstalled, as it might be the case, when it comes around my phone, my technology, and how much it bugs me.
Well, now that we're done talking about whipping stuff out, let's go to the last bullet point here.
So number 7 is storytelling one-upmanship. We're all storytellers, and we all have a competitive nature. That's why when someone tells a story, we feel the urge to tell a better story, and it can take truly stupid forms as well. For instance, one might say, dude, I saw an accident on 4th Street. This and this happened. And the other might say something along the lines of, bro, that's nothing. I saw an even bigger accident last week. The person who tells a story has the spotlight. When you tell a better story, you try to steal the spotlight. You steal attention from them, and we all like attention. So no one likes the person that steals it from us. Therefore, if you have a better story, shut up. Save it for some time else. Let the fellow storyteller enjoy the spotlight. And I did want to put an asterisk next to this one, because I think in some of the kind of some of our culture, I feel, has gotten this blurred with somebody telling a relatable story. I think a relatable story is not necessarily the same as one-upping, and I don't think it comes from the same drivers that this is talking about as far as being competitive and wanting the better ooh and ah. Mm-hmm. Sometimes people also tell a story, so this can also come with the grain of your relationship with the person that's doing this, right? Some people also sometimes tell a story to relate to you. If, like my cat dying, you know what I mean? My cousin's cat just passed away. So I didn't bring up my cat dying to one-up my cousin. I brought it up to her so she knows that there's somebody else to talk to that's also freshly going through this, right? And I think sometimes when people are very sensitive, and this again goes into the emotional brain, so I'm not making fun of it. I'm just saying that it's a thing when you're really on your emotional brain. It can be very easy to take somebody's genuine attempt to bond with you over a similarity, which is another thing that's very natural to human nature, as one-upmanship. So do try to give your good friends and family that benefit of the doubt that maybe you would want if you were trying to relate to them.
Yeah, you don't want to be like my ex-sister-in-law who, on the day my oldest son was born, announced to everybody that she was pregnant as well.
Maybe pause a day. Like, that didn't need to happen right away.
Yeah. I love bringing up that story.
Oh gosh, that does kind of remind me. There was a God, am I the asshole thing that they posted, because they had announced their engagement. And I guess his sister had this whole planned reveal that they were pregnant. And see, now that to me was different because she had planned something, obviously. She didn't do it as a reaction to you announcing you were engaged. Mm-hmm. She had like this wrapped thing. It was like a picture from the ultrasound. And so I'm like, I think maybe you're kind of the asshole here. Because clearly this wasn't done to one-up you. Clearly that was very planned and they shouldn't have had to alter their plans just because you happened to announce you were engaged, right? So again, it's like learning how to kind of unpack things instead of going right to the offensive.
It's basically reading the room. I mean, as far as the storytelling thing, period, I think, a group of friends can understand that, people have different stories, and when you're having a conversation with someone, it's going to come up that somebody else will, oh, hey, I had something similar, and it's X, Y, and Z. But, we've also all met that person that wanted to be the center of attention.
Right. Doesn't that also go into some of the stuff we brought up? Like, it depends on how they're doing it. Are they doing it all the time? Are they constantly steamrolling you? Or is there a way that you can maybe unpack this and process it that shows that they are a good friend, they obviously care about you, and maybe they're trying to bond with you? So
they're just goofy in the head. I don't know.
Like the first time I read this article, that was the only one that made me go, yeah, but. Because, as humans, we do have a lot of our evolution that has actually come around information sharing. Mm-hmm. So that's even like some of the advice stuff that comes on naturally. A lot of don't eat that fruit, it will kill you, came from personal experience being shared and possibly some unsolicited advice of watching, again, this is talking about evolution. So this is like long time ago of, ugh, don't eat that. It killed Booga or whatever. You know what I mean? So a lot of these things do come from natural urges that are actually rooted in the intention of caring about you. But yeah, obviously there's some things that are also worth working on. Check your intention. It goes into that favorite thing that I love to promote people to do is shadow work and shadow integration, which is more Freudian themed if you're a psychology nerd like me. But the self-work, the self-reflection, where can you improve as a human? And some of that is working on these things and not doing that. But some of it is also learning how to try to see that intention in your dear friends and family. That maybe the joke isn't to make fun of you and make you feel bad. Yeah. Maybe it really is an attempt to try to bond with you or deflect with humor. Maybe that advice they're trying to give isn't them saying that they know better than you, but rather trying to relay something that they've experienced themselves and just want to help you because they care about you. So both sides, right?
Yes. If anything, just know that you have people that do love you out there, and as human beings, we're all flawed, and it's just keep that in mind.
Yeah.
Because, treat treat your friends the way you want them to treat you.
Yeah. I mean, and if you're a stranger, don't expect that, right? Like, I think there is a point where you have to earn the friendship to even have a chance at that person giving you that benefit of the doubt. So very clearly, if you do these things to strangers, maybe don't. Like, try not to. Try to work on that.
Yeah.
And if this is in your friend group or something that you experienced from a friend, try to give that benefit of the doubt. They've already established that they care about you. So I think that the weird thing, or the kind of funny thing about this, is it kind of gave directions to work on in both ways. Like how we take things and also how we come off to people, especially strangers. Gonna underline that one.
Well, I think that will wrap it up for us this week here, unless you have anything else you wanted to say to your new friends out there.
Oh, no. I'm just like, all right, well, like, I probably won't hear from you. Like, well, that was they didn't even listen to the most recent episodes. I super doubt. If we do have any listeners, please understand, like, I'm more making fun of the overall attitude I was hit with, not by any individual person in that group, I guess. I don't know. Hopefully, I try not to be an asshole for the most part. Sorry if I offended you, I guess. I can apologize.
Anyway. Well, that will wrap it up for us this week. On Thursdays, check out the latest episodes of Tim's Tremendous Tapes exclusively on Spotify. And for Friends Talking Nerdy, each Saturday we will have something in this podcast space to entertain your ear holes. Until we meet again, we bid you adieu.
Keep it real, everybody.
Damn right.
Subscribe to Friends Talking Nerdy on iTunes, the Google Play Music Store, as well as Spotify. Remember to support Friends Talking Nerdy on Patreon. Goodbye, darling.